a few years ago, we were in Vegas at a convention, and Brenda was speaking, and it was the anniversary, one of the anniversaries of my sister's passing, and I had to leave the convention because I did like an all-day meditation in tribute to my sister, and so I left the convention, and I was really feeling a lot of sadness and loss, and I came home and I did, this ritual that I do, and it was beautiful. And I got a phone call, and it was Brenda. And I think she was calling me from the airport. And I thought, oh, I just had the goosebumps. It was like, and we all know it was one of those perfect moments that I needed a touch of love from someone. And it was Brenda that called me. And Brenda, I don't think I don't even know if I've ever told you this story, but you touched me at that perfect moment, and I want to thank you for that. And then just recently I saw Brenda at our convention. She was one of our women speakers, and after the closing of the convention, we were all circled up and we did the closing prayer, and right after the prayer was very extremely meaningful. And right after the prayer, Brenda came dashing across the floor, and she hugged me, and we cried together. And it was one of those, again, those special, special moments. And what I want to share with the newcomer is that there are so many gifts and so many blessings that we get in recovery. And I used to tell my sister all the time, oh, I just love that girl. She's so nice. And my sister would say, well, where did you meet her? And I would say at a convention. And I said, she's like a BFF. And my sister would say, well, how many times have you seen her? And I say, oh, about 8. And that's how it is. That's a gift of Narcotics Anonymous. We are so connected with the power of love. And Brenda, I love you so much. Brenda is the most kind, loving, caring, gentle woman that I know. And thank you. So we're in for a treat tonight.
Thank you, Roseanne. I'm Brenda B. I'm an addict. I'm always grateful first to God for his grace and his mercy. Very grateful to be in a meeting of Narcotics Anonymous anywhere in the world. I always feel like I'm at home when I'm with all of you. I have to say that I'm already on the verge of tears tonight just because there are faces in this meeting that I have not seen for so long. And my dear friends Carolyn and Bob from up on North Puget Sound area up there somewhere now, and Butch and Yvonne, and there's just so many of you that I've loved for so long that have been on this recovery journey with me. And I'm always stunned when people like that I've known for a jillion years show up because or somehow thinking that I may be like, I'm always thinking, why would they show up to hear my shit again, right? But oh my goodness. So I'll just start out crying, and then maybe I can end up crying too, because that's kind of how it goes with me. Hi, Shanna. Anyway, let's see, I don't even know how to start these because it's hard to put, I got clean on the 15th day of September, 1981. So if I stay clean till the 15th of September, 2021, I'm gonna be celebrating 40 years clean. And I'm only 44 now. So I got clean when I was really young. Actually, I was over 30 by the time I got clean, so I'm over 70. And I'm just going to give the capsulized version of for identification. I used anything that was offered to me. I used things that I don't even know what it was. I used in the beginning, I was a weekend warrior, and then my weekends got longer and longer. They began on Thursday and ended on Monday. Then I was an everyday addict. And then I was an all day, everyday addict. And then the last 5 years that I really used against my own will. It was like wandering around in the desert in the dark, looking for a way out. I knew that something had to change in my life, and I was desperate, and I was looking for a way out of the mess that my life had become, but I could not find you guys. I found other fellowships. I went in and out of mental institutions. I went in and out of relationships with anybody that I thought was better than I was, that maybe their betterness would somehow make my life better too. And it never took very long for them to figure out that I was like a scab on an old wound, and to just pick me off and discard me. And, you know, my life was a wreck when I got here. I had my first baby while I was chained and shackled to a delivery table in a women's prison up in Washington State. I'd been married 4 or 5 times by the time I got here, and I just turned 30 years old. I was using drugs on a daily basis with my 13-year-old and my 11-year-old. And I thought that I was being a good mother, a good parent. I thought I was teaching them the ropes of the life that was inevitable for them to get involved in. And, you know, it was a damn mess. And the last time I used, I got left for dead on the side of the road up near SeaTac Airport. And it was actually while I was in the intensive care unit that I picked up the phone and called the 24-hour hotline for a different 12-step fellowship, one that I'd tried off and on for over 5 years. And I knew that it wasn't an exact fit, but it was the closest fit to anything else that I'd ever found. And in my desperation, I picked up the phone and I called them. And as soon as the woman answered, I told her, look, lady, I don't just have a problem with one drug. I have a problem with every drug I've ever used, everything I've ever used. I'm addicted to marijuana, you know, the nice little herb that you can't get addicted to. I'm strung out like a research monkey on marijuana. And she said that she didn't think that she could help me. And I remember feeling utter hopelessness and thinking that it's because there's no hope for someone like me. Like there's no answer for a girl like me, a worthless, unlovable, bad human being. And so I began to weep, and she said, she had heard about a program called Narcotics Anonymous, and my ears perked up, and I remember thinking, oh my God. And she said she didn't know anything about them, but she would see if she could find someone from Narcotics Anonymous to get back with me. And, you know, 15 minutes later, the phone rang in that ICU, and it was you guys. It was one of you guys calling. And it was the phone call that changed my life. It was the answer to my prayers. And I didn't even know I'd been praying. I didn't know that when you're down on your knees in utter desperation and you cry out, God, help me. I did not know that that was a prayer. Had no idea. If I'd known it was a prayer, I probably wouldn't have said it. That's how pissed off I was at God. And so, you know, so I got to the rooms. I got to the rooms in the fall of 1981. There were no books. There was no basic text. There was no It Works How and Why. There was no Living Clean, the Journey Continues to guide us on our merry way. There wasn't even a step working guide to tell me how to work the steps. Jimmy had a 4th step thing that had been copied a jillion times and passed out among members of the fellowship, and that's what I worked my 4th steps from, and I did my other steps the way they showed us how to do it in the AA meetings that I was going to, because NA was in its infancy up in the greater Puget Sound region, up in the Pacific Northwest. And there weren't enough meetings in a week to support the recovery of an addict who wanted to use all day, every day. And so I did whatever meetings I had to do in the beginning, but I remember making this promise to God that if God would just help me stay clean one day, that I would do one day of service in Narcotics Anonymous, and I would help NA grow, and I would help NA flourish, and I would give back to Narcotics Anonymous every single day that Narcotics Anonymous gave to me clean. And so my first meeting of NA, I washed ashtrays and I wiped off tables and chairs and folded up the chairs and put them away. And I swept the floor when we were done and closed up the meeting room. And that was my first day of service. And tonight, sitting here sharing my experience, strength, and hope with you is my service for today. And so, you know, God's been keeping his promise for almost 40 years to me. He's been keeping me clean in Narcotics Anonymous for almost 40 years. And so I've been keeping my promise to God. I don't want to mess with God. Like, God's like the best thing I've had going on in my life. So I don't even know where to really, I want to talk to you guys about relationships. And that's because before this meeting, I prayed about what am I supposed to talk about? And what came to me is relationships. And I rarely ever share about relationships. So I'm just going to tell you my story. My story is that I come from a family of Midwest farmers. And in my family, no one's ever been divorced. Like, both sets of my grandparents were married for over 60 years until one or the other died. My parents were married over 50 years when my father died. My sisters and brothers, all of my sisters and brothers married their high school sweethearts and stayed married to the same person for their entire adult life until one or the other of them died. I got married the first time when I was 15 years old. I paid an old woman in a flop house hotel on 2nd and Yamhill in Portland, Oregon, a fifth of wine that I had boosted that morning to go down to the Multnomah County Courthouse and sign saying she was my mother, because I thought she looked like me. I thought we could pass. And so I got married for the first time when I was 15 years old. By the time I was 16 years old, I'd been arrested on 32 felony counts of grand theft auto. And the state of Washington, the Department of Institutions, which is now Department of Corrections, was really tired of my shit. So they remanded me to the Department of Adult Institutions at the age of 16. And I was one of the youngest female inmates that was sent to an adult institution at that time. After I got there, they realized I was pregnant. I realized I was pregnant. They realized I was pregnant. And the state of Washington annulled my marriage because it wasn't legal. But they couldn't annul my pregnancy. And so I delivered my baby while I was there. The second time I got married, when I paroled out of that institution, I went back to my parents' home, right back into my dad's disease of addiction. And within 3 months after I got there, I ran off and got married to someone else, like an escape route. It was a means of escape for me. And by the time I was 24, I think, I'd been married for the third time. And at 28, I got married for the fourth time. Always looking for a way out, always looking for somebody who was going to save me, somebody who was going to make my life different. And it was in that marriage. What was different in my fourth marriage was that I also had two young stepchildren, and I had become really violent toward the end of my using because I was so mentally ill, and I was really abusive. I was very troubled. I was in and out of mental institutions, and that was the state of my life when I got to the rooms with you guys. When I'd been around the rooms for around 5 years, I got married, and I married a really nice guy, a guy by the name of Steve C. He was from the program. He was a really good man. He took really good care of me. He was a good husband. But the truth is, I lacked the skills and maturity to participate in a relationship with him or anybody. I didn't have relationship skills that I needed. I didn't even know really what I was doing staying clean when I had 5 years. When I had 5 years clean, I got arrested for shoplifting. So I wasn't even rigorously practicing the principle of honesty at that point. And things were still kind of a mess, but he was nice to me and he was kind to my children. And I remained in that marriage until about 1993 or 4. And then we divorced. And so now I'm approximately 35 years old, and I've been married 5 times. And everything in my life was still a mess. I'd been clean, and I felt like I was changing, and I felt like I really had found the way. Narcotics Anonymous was the way, but I still had this kind of belief that what I really needed was a good husband and a credit card. And if I had those 2 things, everything was going to be okay. And that's really not what happened for me. After my marriage with Steve ended, I decided that it was really time for me to go to work. And what happened was I ended up going into therapy and dealing with some of the trauma that I was bringing to each one of the relationships that I showed up in. And it was in doing my trauma work that I finally began to heal the earliest wounds of my spirit in my heart, the earliest wounds of my life. And I began to learn communication skills, and I began to learn about boundaries, and I began to learn all these things that you have as an adult that I just didn't have. I didn't know. I didn't know where people went and got them. And I finally was getting them in therapy. And so, but I stayed single from 1995 until John and I got together in 2001. On August 1st, 2001, John came to live with me. And, John came to me, when he came to me and told me that he'd like to start dating, he said that he had been a cheater in every relationship he'd ever been in, that he had cheated on all of his wives, and that the last person he cheated on, his 4th wife, that he never again wanted to see that look of pain on the face of a woman because of his behavior. And that if I would give him a chance, that he was going to be monogamous and faithful in a relationship, not because I was prettier or smarter or better than any of the other women he had loved, but because he had learned his lesson and worked some steps, and he was going to do things differently. And I remember I went to my friend Harry Watson down in Portland. I called Harry. I knew that Harry had worked in the treatment center that John went to when John got clean. And I knew that Harry had known John for many, many years. And I called Harry and I said, Harry, John Anderson wants me to go out with him. And what do you think? And Harry said, run for your life. He told me to run for my life. I'm not kidding. It became a joke between the three of us until the day Harry died. It was so priceless because he meant it. And
that wasn't a joke to me.
And I didn't run. I didn't run. I thought, to myself, I thought, oh my God, I've married men who had far less to offer with far less reason to marry them. And so, loser girl meets loser boy. I've been married. We stayed together. He asked me to marry him all the time. And I said, no, I'm not marrying you till we've been together 8 years. Cause like 7 years, my deal breaker year, like that's when I always kick him to the curb. And so 5 minutes after we had our 8th anniversary, he asked me to marry him again. And we did marry that year. And on August 1st this year, it's going to be 20 years that we've had a sustained relationship based on fidelity and trust and faithfulness and many of the spiritual principles that, I feel like we've grown up together a lot in these 20 years that we've been together. So I wanted to talk to you about that. Like, not everybody who looks like a loser on the surface when you look at their history is like it really is. This is a place where we learn from our mistakes and we can do things differently. It's not a place where you have to try to be perfect. The only thing you have to do perfectly is not use one day at a time. And sometimes you can even break that down. I want to tell you guys about an experience that happened to us, and then I'm going to wrap it up because I want John to have lots of time. Last Christmas, John and I were both diagnosed with COVID, and John was given monoclonal antibody infusion, and he cleared the virus in a couple weeks and pretty much recovered really well. And they said that I was too young. I was only 69 then, and that I didn't have enough underlying illnesses because I only had asthma. So I wasn't a candidate for the monoclonal antibody infusion. So for the next 10 weeks, I was sick. I had fluid in my lower left lobe. I could not breathe. I couldn't go outside because there's fine sand that floats in the air all the time in Phoenix, and I could not breathe. And I did 3 rounds of steroids that were just awful. And I was nebulizing 4 times a day. It was not good. And yet we were doing far better than many other people that we were hearing about or reading about in the COVID survivors group. And in the mornings before I got COVID, every morning I go out in my garden to do my 11th step. And I water my little plants out there, all my flowers. I water all my little plants and stuff. And I talk to the birds, and these little hummingbirds come, and there's this big old crow that comes and sits on the neighbor's house, and I call him Jack White, and he comes and screams at me in the morning, and I go, "Good morning, Jack. What are you doing?" And we just talk. And so when I started to get better from COVID, the day came where I really wanted to get back out in the garden. And this one morning, I felt like my breathing was good enough that I could go back, and I opened the door and I went out into the garden. And I remember walking from the patio door straight out to the corner of the garden where I had this beautiful lantana growing, and I just stood there, and I felt the sun on my skin and on my face, and I felt this light desert breeze, warm desert breeze blowing on my face, and pretty soon the crow that always sits up on the neighbor's house, he came down and he sat on the top of the fence. He sat right on the top of the fence, close to where I was, and he chatted at me, and he crowed at me, and he cawed at me. And pretty soon these two little hummingbirds came flitting through from the olive tree, and they got right in front of my face, and they lingered. They just sat there and hovered with me they just stayed with me. And then I saw this little butterfly lift up from the lantana and come over toward me, and she circled in front of me, and then she went behind me and came back around, and she just stayed with me. And the hummingbirds were still there, and the crow was singing to me up on the wall. And then this little bumblebee came, and this little bumblebee came right beside my left ear, and he just sat here and he buzzed. I wasn't afraid of him. I didn't feel scared that he was gonna sting me. He just stayed there, and he buzzed and buzzed and buzzed. And then it occurred to me that on this morning in my garden, that all of these little creatures were coming to welcome me back, that they had missed my presence in the garden, that they knew that I had been missing for 10 weeks, and they didn't know what had happened to me. And on this morning, they were all coming there to tell me how glad they were that I made it back to be in this place with them. And I have to tell you that almost 40 years down my recovery road, in that moment, in that garden, with those little creatures, I knew for the first time in my life, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that my presence in this world matters, that I matter, that I belong here. I belong. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. And I, I go out every morning and hang out with all of them and the little creatures that they are. And I don't know why I needed to tell you that story, but I feel compelled to share it with as many people as I can. I really feel compelled to share that experience with as many people as I can. And maybe it was more meaningful to me than it will be to anyone else. But to know that God loves me that much, it exceeds anything I ever hoped for when I got to the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous. And that's the kind of love that I've been getting from God through you and addicts just like you, in room after room, meeting after meeting, year after year, here in Narcotics Anonymous. I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be clean. I'm grateful to be here to share my experience, strength, and hope. I hope that something I shared helped you with your recovery today. Thank you so much.
My name is John. I'm an addict. I love my wife. I just love my wife. So, the first time I used drugs, I used to drug alcohol, and what happened? It turned my world from black and white to technicolor. And then I used everything else, and that just kind of enhanced my world. And to give you an idea of that, I remember my mother caught me in her bedroom, in her master bathroom, shooting dope, and man, it freaked her out. And she got on the phone and called the police. And so I snatched the phone out of her hand. I said, Mom, I'll do anything. I'll do anything. Don't call the cops. And so she said, I want you to see a psychiatrist. And I said, I'll do that. So she sets us an appointment with a psychiatrist, you know, and $150 an hour. And we went to Fresno and we see the psychiatrist and I walk into his office and he's wearing a $1,000 suit, man. And he says, tell me your story, man. So I start talking about drugs and I'm minimizing, you know. And so he says, so I'm going to tell you what your problem is, John. I said, you know, and like I've listed before, I waited for all my life for these guys to tell me what my problem is. And he said, your problem is the things that you smoke, swallow, shoot, and snort. That's your problem. And see, I knew this guy didn't know what the fuck he was talking about because that wasn't my problem. It was how I felt when I didn't do those things. That was my problem. That was my problem. And I went on to bigger and better things, you know. Went to my first meeting in Narcotics Anonymous. Well, let me give my claim date is April 25th, 1978. And I say that because that's the most important day of my life. The most important day of my life. It's more important than my wife's birthday, my birthday, my kid's birthday. It's more important than anything else because that's the day that Narcotics Anonymous and God, because I don't understand God, breathed the life back into me, you know. So you know, I my first meeting was in penitentiary in 1973. And there were 3 guys that came in on a H&I panel. And I was there. I went to that meeting, not because I was curious about Narcotics Anonymous. I went to that meeting because they would give me put a chrono in my jacket that went to the parole board and it would look good. So I went to this meeting. And there were 3 guys at that meeting, H&I meeting, and it was a guy named Pepe Acuna, a guy named Jack White, a guy named Mel H. And of those 3, only one's still alive today, and that's Mel. And I love Mel. And anyway, so they talked about they told their story. You know, now I couldn't afford to believe their story, but I listened to their story. I couldn't afford to believe it because then I wasn't ready to stop. And so I didn't get clean from their 5 years. So I remember the last, this was my day. I got out of penitentiary, I moved to Oregon because moved to Reno because there's no drugs in Reno, moved to Oregon because there's drugs in Oregon. So I'm on the methadone program in Oregon, 1977. And I got arrested for armed robbery and burglary. And so I had to kick all the stuff out. My daily habit was 90 milligrams of methadone and all the Southern Comfort I could get down, all the beer I could get down, all the Quaaludes I could get down, all the Valiums I could get down. You know, that was my habit. You know, and when I went to jail, I had to kick all that stuff. I almost died in the county jail. They didn't know how to deal with addicts. 1977, Oregon. And I got back in the hospital, and I was walking I got a visit from my wife, and we had a new little baby, and my wife handed my son to the matron so she could talk to me through a piece of glass, and I had these realizations. I realized that I was going to watch my son grow up from the visiting room of a penitentiary for at least next 10 years of his life. And I realized that when the kid said, "Where's your dad?" he was going to either have to lie or tell him the truth. And the worst realization I had was that I didn't have anybody to blame anymore. See, and I believe that when this addict runs out of people, places, and things to blame for our condition, that's terrifying. So I just hung up, walked out, and got on the phone to my mother. Asked my mother if she would bail me out, man. And my bill was $150,000. She said no. I said, I can't believe you're saying no to me. You know, why? She said, I've been talking to Al-Anon. And I said, Al-Anon? Who in the fuck is Al? I don't know Al. And Al doesn't know me, Mom. He doesn't know the level of my sincerity this time. And so she said, no. And she told me what Al-Anon was. And she said, I said, what are the people, what are the weirdos in Al-Anon telling you, man? She said, well, they said the best way to help you is not to help you. And she hung up. All right, and I'm walking back to my cell. And this is God's timing. It's so good. Like I walked by this guy, and he was there with a drug program that he had for someone, and they didn't want it. He was getting ready to leave. And he saw me and asked the nurse, who was that? Nurse said, I found this out later, but nurse said, hopeless drug addict, going pensions for a long time. She said, I got a program for him. I want to talk to him. So what happened was I walked in this room, and there's this guy, man. And this guy did this thing, man, that was really new to me. He started talking to me about him. See, people have been talking to me about me my whole life. And he started talking to me about him. See, he allowed me the dignity to relate. He allowed me the dignity to relate. I was able to say, yeah, I felt that way too. I did that too. Yeah, I was there too. You know, it made me feel a part of the process. So I went to this drug program that he had going on. You know, he got the robbery dropped, he pled guilty to burglary. And so I went to this drug program. 14 months in this drug program. And I told him I want to go back to jail because, you know, they wouldn't let me go to work. They said I wasn't ready. Going back to jail. And I got loaded in the county jail. Took my last drug out of county jail. April 24th, 1978. You know, I found this book in the county jail. It wasn't the NA book because we didn't have a book in 1978. Now, I know that some NA purists, it would say, John, you should have waited 5 years. We'd have brought you a book. Well, I'm sorry, but I was a little bit desperate, you know what I mean? And so I opened this fucking book, man, and it said, lack of power. That was it was certainly my dilemma. It was certainly my dilemma. And so I took the first 3 steps in the county jail. And I went to court, and the judge let me go. I'm on probation, but let me go. And so I call up the guy that was going to be my sponsor, and I said, you know, I'm afraid to go to a meeting. I'm afraid not to. I blew 14 months. Drank some homemade wine, smoked some weed. And he said, I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. He was there in 15. Now, you know, I got to tell you that what my sponsor said was this. He said, you got loaded in the county jail. You relapsed. I said, yeah. He said, what are you going to do different? He didn't pat me, oh, John, it'll be okay. Oh, you're all right. You'll be all right. He didn't do that shit, man. He said, what the fuck are you going to do different, John? Because if you keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same thing. My sponsor has a logic, man, was not his forte, man. You know what I mean? But it was. So I started doing stuff different. And you know, I remember my sponsor told me that my problem was not that I couldn't stop. He said, don't get hung up on that myth that your problem is you can't stop. He said, you stop 2 or 3 times a day, motherfucker. You know, he said, your problem is you can't stay stopped. That's what your problem is, John. That's what we say, NA, you don't need NA to stop. You go to detox for that. You don't have to stay stopped. So there I was. So I started working steps, and about 90 days after I was clean, I had an obsession to use. It was on me. Called my sponsor. Did something different. Called my sponsor. He was out of town. Called a friend of mine. He came over. We did the 3rd step. We read a step out loud out of the book, the NA book, AA book. I mean, and we said the 3rd step, and we prayed out loud with each other. I'd never done that before. And so I began to work steps, and my life began to change. And I remember riding my bicycle to work and seeing the grass greener than I ever seen it before. Seen the sky bluer than I ever seen it before. People coming down the bike path were didn't have those edges on them, and I realized that the obsession was gone. I just realized that. I don't know how I just realized it, and about a year later, God that I didn't understand, that I hated, that I didn't believe in, alleviated an obsession for me. One of the best gifts I've ever been given. And I went to a minister because I was having a hard time with God, and I said, I don't understand. He said, when's the last time? When was your first conception of God? I said, I was about 9 years old, and I went to church with my sister, and the neighbors took me to church at this Assembly of God church, and they spoke in tongues and fell on the floor and talked about how God did things to people and fucked people over and in the name of God, and man, it scared me to death. And he said, well, John, next time you have a major decision to make in your life, go ask an 8-year-old what you should do. He freed me. He freed me from those chains of having having to believe that somehow those people knew who God was, and they imparted that to a 9-year-old kid, and I'm supposed to believe it. I couldn't. He said, you can have any kind of God you want, John. You just have to have one. So I began to look into Buddhism. I liked it. It felt good to me. So I want to talk about relationships also, but I want to talk about relationships with my children. My son, he's 45. He's living in Los Angeles. He's drawn that pandemic, unemployment. He has some skills, but he doesn't use them. He's drinking, smoking weed, and so he called me. We've had a weird relationship. So he's called me, and we're talking, and he says, how you doing? I said, how you doing? He goes, Dad, I don't like to talk to you about how I'm doing. I said, why not? He said, because you always give me those NA pat answers, always give me that NA solution bullshit. That you want to talk about God, and you talk. I don't want you to be my fucking sponsor, Dad. Man, it hurt me. So I said, well, yeah, okay. He said, I'll tell you. So he says, I've got a brain tumor. It's benign, but it's pressing on my optic nerve. I had an MRI, and I'm going to the UCLA Medical Center and get some treatment for it. And so right away I said, well, Josh, have you done this? Have you done this? He said, stop, Dad. I don't want to hear that shit. And I said, well, you know what? Fuck. I'm done with this conversation. I hung up. So Mr. Spiritual, your son tells you he has a brain tumor, and Mr. Spiritual has to give you some kind of spiritual advice. So I call my sponsor and ask him if he'll pray with me for my son. He said, I'll pray with you for your son, Josh, John, but I'll pray for you too. And so we prayed, and the next day I woke up and felt guilty because one more time. I didn't measure up. And so, so I prayed again. Brenda read me something out of the Living Clean about parenting, page 145. Wonderful, wonderful book. I love that book. And so I'm getting ready to call a friend of mine, and my son calls me. And he says, Dad, I'm sorry that, I was acting crazy with you. I said, well, I'm sorry too, Josh. I said, Josh, I don't know how to talk to you. Teach me. Teach me. He said, I want to have a relationship with you. And we'll work this out. So, Brenda, I love Brenda. So Brenda says, you know what you got today, John? I said, what? She got evidence, man. Evidence. Roseanne talks about evidence all the time. So, I remember Pepe was my sponsor for a while, and Pepe said, I remember him saying to me, God, John, I found God to be three things. I said, what's that, Pepe? He said, fast, friendly, and fair. Fast, friendly, and fair. So my 43 years, I've also found God to be fast, friendly, and fair. And so I continue to talk about this with my sponsor. Jimmy S, man, I call Jimmy because Jimmy's like another sponsor for me. He doesn't know, but he isn't. And so I talked to him about it and talked to my friend Billy Ryan. I shared this with people, man, like that's what I'm supposed to do. And I felt better. And I will have a relation with my son. I will have one because I'm willing to be teachable. I'm willing to be taught by my son how to talk to him. And, I had to put that ego aside. Relationships can be healed in this program. My daughter just got a paid gig at the Comedy Store, man. I don't know, Karen can tell you that don't happen often, but she's doing good. She's writing a Netflix series. So my daughter's doing good. Everything's okay. Everything's okay. And I don't have to use over this shit, man. I don't have to use over this shit. I want to just read something to you real quick, okay? It's from Works on Why, and it's the last paragraph in the 7th step. It says, we are being changed. We are being changed. We've not only heard about the miracle of recovery, we're becoming living, breathing examples of what the power of the NAM program can do. The spiritual life has ceased to be a theory we hear about in meetings. It is now becoming tangible reality. We can see a miracle simply by looking in the mirror. The God of our understanding is taking us from spiritually unconscious, hopeless addicts to spiritually aware, recovering addicts, eager to live. That happened to me. It could happen to you. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you guys so much, man.
Thank you, John.
you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Everybody.
Thank you, my brother.
Love you, Johnny.
Pray for your son.
Love you, Brenda.
Hey, Brenda.
Love you, John. Love you, Brenda. Thank you.
Love you.
More evidence.
Love you, Brenda.
I love you. Love you so much.
St. George loves both of you. Thank you.
Class of 81, Brenda.
Woohoo! Yeah.